In 1810, a pound of sugar cost the average English worker a full day of wages. By 1900, factory workers were stirring it into their tea 3 times a day. That single shift, from luxury to staple, changed the world more than almost any other product in history. But sugar's story does not start in England or on a plantation. It starts in a jungle, about 10,000 years ago, on the island of New Guinea, deep in the South Pacific. Indigenous people discovered something growing wild in the tropical lowlands. A tall, thick grass with a fibrous stalk. They pulled it from the ground, bit into it, and tasted something no human had ever tasted before in that form. Pure, concentrated sweetness. Raw sugarcane. For thousands of years, that was the extent of sugar's reach. People simply chewed the raw stalk. For energy and enjoyment, spread slowly across Southeast Asia. Island by island, generation by generation. By around 3500 BC, sugarcane had reached the Indian subcontinent. And that is where everything changed. Ancient Indian farmers did not just chew the cane. They figured out how to crush it, boil the juice, and let the liquid crystallize into a rough, brown solid. They called it kanda, which is where the English word candy comes from. For the first time in history, sugar could be stored and transported. India had essentially invented sugar as a product. Physicians across the subcontinent began prescribing it as medicine. Sugar was sacred. Around 326 BC, Alexander the Great sent his armies east into India. His soldiers came back with stories of a remarkable plant. One officer described finding a reed that produces honey without bees. The Greeks were stunned. Even with this discovery, sugar remained an exotic curiosity in the Western world. For centuries, it was too expensive, too difficult to transport. When sugar appeared in Roman pharmacies, it was sold in tiny quantities, at prices only the wealthiest could afford. A single pound could cost a month's wages. Sugar was not food, it was medicine. The people who truly unlocked sugar's potential were Arab traders and chemists. During the Islamic Golden Age, between the 7th and 13th centuries, Arab scholars perfected the process of refining sugar. They built sugar mills across Persia, Egypt, and North Africa. They began trading refined sugar across the known world. By the time European crusaders arrived in the Levant in 1096, sugar was already woven into Middle Eastern cuisine. The crusaders tasted it and lost their minds. They called it a most precious product. Knights started hauling bags of it back to Europe, along with their swords and holy relics. Venice, sitting at the crossroads of East and West, became the sugar gateway to Europe. For about 200 years, Venice essentially held a monopoly on European sugar, and the profits were enormous. In medieval Europe, sugar was treated the way we treat gold today. Kings displayed sugar sculptures at royal banquets as demonstrations of wealth. At the wedding feast of Henry III in 1236, the royal household purchased over 300 pounds of sugar for a single celebration, a sum worth more than a knight's annual income. If you could afford sugar, you were somebody. But there was a problem. Sugarcane needs tropical climates to grow. You cannot grow it in England, France, or Scandinavia. European demand was skyrocketing, but the supply chain depended entirely on trade with the Islamic world. This is the part of sugar's history that most people never learn about. In the 1400s, Portugal began colonizing Atlantic islands, Madeira, the Canary Islands, São Tomé. They discovered these islands had the perfect climate for sugarcane. Portuguese planters set up the first European-controlled sugar plantations. And they needed labor. First, they used convicts and poor Europeans. That did not last. Sugar cultivation is brutal. Workers dropped from exhaustion, injury, and disease. So Portugal turned to enslaved Africans. The sugar plantations of São Tomé became a testing ground for what would become the most horrific labor system in modern history. When Columbus crossed the Atlantic in 1492, he brought sugarcane cuttings with him on his second voyage. The Caribbean climate was perfect, the soil was perfect, and the demand back in Europe was insatiable. The process of making sugar was itself a kind of hell. Workers had to feed the stalks into massive grinding mills within hours before the juice spoiled. Workers who fed the cane into the rollers risked losing fingers, hands, and arms. Plantation owners kept hatchets nearby, so a trapped limb could be severed quickly. After grinding, the juice was boiled in copper kettles over roaring fires. The boiling house was suffocatingly hot, often reaching temperatures above 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Burns from splashing molten sugar were constant. The work never stopped. By the 1650s, tiny Barbados, an island the size of San Antonio, Texas, was producing more sugar than all of Brazil. It was the most valuable colony in the entire British Empire, more valuable than all the North American colonies combined. The human cost of this was catastrophic. Roughly 12.5 million enslaved Africans were forced onto ships and transported across the Atlantic. The average life expectancy of an enslaved person on a Caribbean sugar plantation was 7 years after arrival. 7 years. Plantation owners calculated that it was cheaper to work people to death and buy replacements than to provide humane living conditions. Sugar did not just benefit from slavery. Sugar drove slavery. It was the economic engine that made the transatlantic slave trade profitable. By the 1700s, sugar had become the most valuable commodity. Traded in the Atlantic world, the so-called triangle trade moved manufactured goods from Europe to Africa, enslaved people from Africa to the Caribbean, and sugar from the Caribbean back to Europe. Every corner of this triangle dripped with sugar money. England became particularly obsessed. By 1700, the average English person consumed about 4 pounds of sugar per year. By 1800, that number had jumped to 18 pounds. Sugar went from a luxury to something the middle class expected in their tea every afternoon. But sugar plantations also created something the colonial powers did not expect: resistance. On the French colony of Saint-Domingue, what we now call Haiti, enslaved workers launched the only successful large-scale slave revolt in history. In 1791, hundreds of thousands of enslaved people rose up. They fought a 12-year war against French, Spanish, and British armies. By 1804, they had won their independence. Haiti became the first free black republic in the Western Hemisphere. And it was born on sugar plantations. The Haitian Revolution sent shockwaves through Europe. France lost its most profitable colony overnight. Napoleon, who had dreamed of a sugar empire, was forced to pivot. He sold the Louisiana Territory to the United States in 1803, partly because without Haiti's sugar revenue, holding that territory made no financial sense. Sugar's collapse in Haiti literally doubled the size of the United States. Napoleon turned to sugar beets. A German chemist had discovered that European beets contained sucrose, identical to cane sugar. Napoleon poured resources into beet sugar production. By 1813, France was producing millions of pounds of beet sugar per year. The monopoly that tropical sugarcane had held for thousands of years was broken. The Industrial Revolution accelerated everything. Steam-powered mills could crush sugarcane faster. Railroads could transport raw cane in hours instead of days. Refining technology improved, until producers could create sugar so white and fine that it bore no resemblance to ancient brown crystals. White sugar became a symbol of purity and modernity. Then came the marriage that would define modern eating habits: sugar and tea. By 1850, British workers were consuming an average of 2 cups of sweetened tea per day. Cheap sweetened tea became the unofficial fuel of the British Empire, and the sugar colonies existed to keep it flowing. By the late 1800s, sugar had infiltrated every corner of Western cuisine. Factory workers putting in 12 to 14-hour shifts needed energy, and sugar delivered it faster than almost anything else. Sugar became the fuel of industrial capitalism. The Coca-Cola Company was founded in 1886. By the early 1900s, Coca-Cola was selling millions of bottles per year. Other soda companies followed. Candy bars hit the market. Breakfast cereals went from plain oats to sugar-coated creations. By 1970, the average American was consuming over 100 pounds of sugar per year. Think about that. 100 pounds. The sugar industry knew there was a problem. As early as the 1950s, internal research showed strong links between sugar consumption and heart disease. In 1967, the Sugar Research Foundation paid 3 Harvard scientists to publish a review that downplayed sugar's role in heart disease and instead blamed dietary fat. The study was published in a prestigious medical journal. It shaped nutritional policy for decades. This is the part that should make you angry. For 30 years, the American public was told fat was the enemy. Food companies removed fat from their products and replaced it with sugar to maintain flavor. The result was an explosion of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. That killed millions of people, and the sugar industry knew. The cover-up started unraveling in 2016, when researchers discovered the internal sugar industry documents. It was the tobacco playbook. Applied to food, create doubt, fund friendly research, attack critics, delay regulation for as long as possible. While the sugar industry was burying research, a new form of sugar was quietly taking over. In the early 1970s, Japanese scientists developed high-fructose corn syrup. By 1984, both Coca-Cola and Pepsi had switched from cane sugar to corn syrup. Within a decade, it had replaced cane sugar in almost every American product. Today, the average American consumes about 17 teaspoons of added sugar per day. The American Heart Association recommends no more than 6 to 9 teaspoons. We are consuming roughly double to triple the recommended amount. Sugar hides in places most people never check. Over 42% of American adults are now classified as obese. Over 37 million Americans have diabetes. Heart disease remains the #1 killer in the United States. Pondering. Sugar is one of the biggest factors. Some countries have started pushing back. Mexico introduced a soda tax in 2014. Consumption dropped by about 12% in the first year. The United Kingdom followed with its own sugar levy. Several American cities have enacted local sugar taxes. Sugar's story spans 10,000 years, 6 continents, virtually every major historical event of the last 5 centuries. It was there when empires rose. It was there when millions were enslaved. It was there when revolutions erupted. And it is here now, in almost everything we eat and drink. A 10,000-year-old grass from a jungle in New Guinea became the most consequential crop in human history. It built fortunes. It destroyed lives. It toppled empires. And it is sitting in your kitchen right now, waiting to be noticed. Thank you for watching this story on Storia English. If you enjoyed learning English through this powerful story, please subscribe to Storia English. Every week we bring you a new story from history, told in clear, slow, simple English, so you can improve your listening, your vocabulary, and your confidence. Naturally, without stress. We will see you in the next story.